Hello, everyone. How you doing? You're very welcome to this week's last word on Formula One. And I know, yes, you missed us last weekend, but we're back. We're back with a bang. Isn't that right, Michael?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. We're going to threaten everybody that we're going to be back every week from here on in. So sorry about
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, that's it. That's it. So, right, because we missed last week, we're going to make up for. We're going to be looking back at the America's Grand Prix and then looking ahead to the Mexico Grand Prix. But we'll start off, as I said, with the America's Grand Prix, and I'm sure with it being the America's Grand Prix, it was not short of entertainment.
Not at all. And I was very surprised to see Formula One Stetsons on the day. That was an unusual one.
There you
That's
go.
something I hadn't seen before because, of course, it was in Austin, Texas. And as luck wouldn't have it, considering we missed last week, it was SAS training weekend and that we had, of course, sprint shootout amongst everything else on top of all that. So it's just to make life, really, really difficult. You know what I mean? They're going to just throw everything in. Well, if you look at the track, it really is an absolutely brilliant track, I have to admit. What they did when they were making it is they looked at all the best tracks around the world and incorporated as many of the best bits they possibly
They
could in
wanted to
that track.
make it look as close to Spaghetti Junction as they could.
That's true. Actually, they did manage to do that as well. We won't argue with that one. But this is definitely the best test track you're ever going to get, and certain people tend to shine here. This is a track that totally suits Mercedes, and for the last two previous years running, Lewis Hamilton has been in second place.
Mm.
Will that change again this time? Well, that's a good question because there is a couple of other things going on just before we hit it. Danny Ricciardo was back, which is significant because, well, the rumor mill is going around at the minute that Checo Perez has been told if he loses the second place in the World Championship, his contract might be at an end this year. So for people like Danny Ricciardo, who basically are Red Bull test drivers. He's just been lent out at the moment. This could be an opportunity to get back into Formula One for Danny, on a proper team and a proper contract again. So, we'll have to see what's going on with that. He's got to prove he's the best man for the job. He's not the only one in for it, as to say, but hopefully Checo Perez will pull out there. Well, sprint shootout was an unusual section. Max was in his usual pace, of course, but setting the early times, making it sort of very, very quick. Leclerc at one stage in Q1 called for George Russell to be penalised for impeding him on the track. Now, if you see it, George basically doesn't get out of the way of the racing line on two corners, and Leclerc has to dive to the inside and dive back out again very quickly. Would he have lost much time? Maybe a tenth of a second, but I suppose in Q1 that's not really massively important, a tenth of a second, unless you're like in 16th place, which let's face it, Charles Leclerc wasn't going to be in
Well,
15th
I
place.
suppose the news of this one was, if the what I heard is true, Lewis Hamilton actually finished in second, but he was disqualified because of the car.
Wait, that's not the end. That's near the end.
We'll go.
You're
We'll
jumping ahead.
mention that at the end. Sorry,
We're jumping ahead.
you were going to mention
We're
it. And I
jumping
never
ahead.
doubted you. I never doubted you. Never doubted you.
Well. Now you're talking about Lewis Hamilton in Q1. There was a bit of a row between him and Yuki Tsunoda because
A row.
Hamilton and
Hang on
Yuki
now. Are we on
Tsunoda.
about Lewis Hamilton and Rowan? Those two things don't
No,
go
no,
in the
no.
same
No,
sentence.
controversy never happens with him. He's
Oh.
just so good. But he was kind of hassling Yuki Tsunoda maybe with a little bit of banging of tires, which made Yuki Tsunoda not being able to finish his lap by the time the time was over. So as you can probably tell, Yuki Tsunoda wasn't a happy camper after that. Now, Danny Ricciardo did a very good job on the day. Now, he did miss out on Q3 by a few hundredths of a second, but consider the team he's driving for, that actually isn't bad. And he needs to impress everybody at the minute. But as well, he needs to be more ahead if he possibly can. It is his first race back after a break in his thumb, I suppose. So it's not too bad. In Q3, Max Verstappen had a rare spin in the car, which was very close. And, it was great in a way to see at the end of it all the top three drivers being from different teams. You had Max Verstappen on pole with Red Bull. You had Charles Leclerc in second place with Ferrari. And you had Lewis Hamilton in third place for Mercedes. Now, the worrying point, as we mentioned, Sergio Perez. Sergio came out in seventh place. Now, bearing in mind, it's exactly the same car as Max Verstappen is driving. I could maybe understand why the teams are kind of a little bit, if you get me.
The finger.
Well, straight onto the sprint race. It was a bit of fun at the start there. Sprint is normally much more aggressive, of course, because only 19 laps. You can't change the tires. You don't need to refill, so they all tend to be sort of on top of each other. But at the start, Charles Leclerc made a very good stab at trying to take Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen just put his car in exactly the right place. Otherwise, Leclerc would have got by. But of course, it compromised Leclerc's first corner, and Hamilton managed to slip underneath him because Leclerc basically had no space left. He just had to slow down. That's not anything. That's just racing, as to say, And Sainz jumps up to fifth. It was interesting because on turn 11 there was 3 cars wide. Sainz and Perez, and it just was absolutely great work. Nobody came off the track, I have to admit. It was just interesting. But again, Sergio Perez didn't have the greatest time known to man, shall we say. Several times he tries to attack Piastri. Piastri is very good. First year, he was defending like an absolute master around the track, I have to admit, and gave everybody such a really, you're just not getting past that man easy in the McLaren. The McLaren is quick too. He does get by him eventually, and he makes the place stick, but not for very long, unfortunately, because his tires start going backwards at the while, and that was a kind of an issue too, as to say, with it. The tires were just a big issue, especially for Ferrari. The car is quick. They just are terrible on tires this year. I don't know what it is. They are very fast. They can get pole position every now and again, but they just can't transfer that into good race pace, which is unusual for Ferrari because normally their qualifying is okay and the race pace is faster. So that's kind of a weird situation, I suppose. By lap 6, anybody on soft tires that weren't working, I have to admit. And, people like Norris were closing up on Sainz and things like that. Big, massive defenses going on the whole time on soft tires. Wasn't going to work.
And I suppose looking at the race, did it go maybe as you probably thought it would? And we say lap times and all the usual things we go on to. Was the good old the good old emergency car required, the safety car required? And now I know it hasn't happened in quite a while, but that word, penalty points. But thankfully in sprint shootout, there was no penalty points at all. Okay, as I said, Oscar Piastri got an old waggle of the finger. And he really was the only one that got a waggle of the finger, I have to admit, in the entire race, in the entire sprint shootout. In the actual race itself, only one person, hold on to it now, only one person got a time penalty for track limits. I mean, was Alex Albon, and he was the only person that was really unusual. Is this track just designed better, you begin to wonder? Was the penalty point deserved, do you feel?
Well, it was. He went off the track limits. He was given a warning. The team got onto him and he went out again. Once you've got the warning, you got to calm it down a bit. You just have to calm it down a bit. I know that's kind of hard for a Formula One driver to say, right, lads, you've got to go a little bit slower around that corner you're coming off, because it's not in your psyche. It can't possibly be. You wouldn't be one of the fastest 22 drivers in the world if it was in your psyche. But at the same time, a 5-second penalty is rough. It is a rough penalty. You don't want to get
5 seconds is a lot, like.
It is actually, in Formula One terms, it can be huge. It can knock you back 2-3 places if the guys behind you are racing very well. So I mean, in the race itself, yeah, that's not something. It didn't make a massive difference, to be honest with you, with Albon. But if you were one of the front runners, that could have been bad. Well, the sprint shootout saw Max Verstappen winning, Charles Leclerc, who had a very difficult race, got second. Fair play to him. And Hamilton in third place. That was very, very good. They kind of stayed put, really. And Checo Perez not really doing anything. Now, the actual qualifying for the race itself was on the day before, the Friday. But we always do that second because it's very confusing if you do qualifying, then sprint qualifying, then sprint gender race. I get confused. I don't know about you. I get confused. But I have to admit, after a kind of a disappointing last race, Lewis Hamilton did come back quite a bit. He was the fastest in Q1, which is saying something. And the Aston Martins assisting, there was no more upgrades coming on the car. They're having a bit of a disaster of the time, straight out in Q1 and 16th and 17th place. I mean, you remember it wasn't that long ago. Fernando Alonso was third, and third again, and third again, and third again. And suddenly he's qualifying in 16th place. That isn't very good, I have to admit. Q2, I suppose, when you were talking about penalties, last lap, Danny Ricciardo did get his time deleted for track limits on turn 19. And now he really, really, really didn't need that, I have to admit. That wasn't really a good show. That was something you didn't need on the day now at all, Danny. But it was the way it was, unfortunately. And that didn't help his positioning, shall we say, in qualifying, and that it kept them all the way down in 15th place. So, no, it's a good one on that one, Danny, unfortunately. Fastest went to Charles Leclerc, when Max in second place and Hamilton in third. It's beginning to become a bit repetitious, I suppose, on this particular one. You know, Sergio Perez, I have to admit, scraped in 10th place on Q2. That was very difficult. You know, again, fastest car on the track, theoretically. You know, it didn't get anywhere at all. Q3, we moved on to George Russell, got his time deleted again on turn 19, believe it or believe it not. And the last run, Charles Leclerc pushed very, very, very hard, I have to admit, to get pole position. And it was a whopper of a lap from Charles Leclerc. Again, the Ferrari's doing a great single lap. Not great in the actual race itself, unfortunately. Their tyres tend to be their Achilles heel. They start off well and then falls back all the time. Maybe they need an extra pit stop. I have no idea. But he did at the end. He managed barely, I have to admit, Charles Leclerc, to keep it in the white lines so close. He very nearly went off on a couple of occasions. It was Charles Leclerc now, just out of sheer curiosity, has now had more pole positions than any other driver who's never won a world championship. That's a record I'm sure he doesn't like to boast about. But, you know, he's had more pole positions. And this was his 100th race. Yeah. So him to get pole position was, a very nice situation, I have to admit. Lando Norris was second because Max Verstappen also had a time deleted, which wasn't great for Max, as I say. Lewis Hamilton, the third, Sainz in fourth, and George Russell did a good job in sixth. Now, the race itself. This is the 18th race weekend season from sort of Austin, Texas. So it's the 18th race this year. We don't have an awful lot of races left. You know, so we have to wait and see. Max Verstappen starting sixth. What exactly could they do? Well, it was an absolutely dream getaway from Lando Norris, I have to admit. He just absolutely took the lead, and Sainz jumping ahead too, and the two Ferraris battling with each other, which, considered they're both having problems with tyre wear, it's not a clever idea because it's going to wear your tyres out a bit more, as to say, you know, rather than anything else. So I'm kind of surprised Ferrari allowed Sainz and sort of Leclerc to fight. Okay, Sainz was in fourth place, and now he's right behind his teammate Leclerc in third place, you know, but I kind of thought that was a bit of a silly situation. We did have poor Esteban Ocon out in a racing incident as well, which was unfortunate on lap 7. He had a bit of a bang and a clatter on lap 1, and it just did not help the car at all. And Oscar Piastri had to retire the car too, with issues. No issues really, I suppose, to a certain extent, but it was the car. It wasn't the driver. So he was driving a very, very good race. When it got really interesting is about lap 10. Joe Granu pulled into the pits. Now, if you remember, Joe, he tended to pull into the pits and pull the trigger on that a little early in the last race. And he did very, very well because of it, because no one else did. And he kind of got the performance and kind of moved ahead a little bit. Not this time. On lap 11, there was a flurry of cars in. It was absolute chaos.
Like the M50 on a Friday evening.
Absolutely, like Roscommon Town Centre. Absolutely.
Oh, that's Friday lunchtime.
Yeah, absolutely. But what was unfortunate around lap 16 is Lando Norris was struggling with balance issues in the car. Now, he wasn't the only one struggling on the day, but basically, the McLaren is susceptible, it seems, to crosswinds, a bit more susceptible than other cars. And on a few corners he was hitting, there was strong crosswinds. Now, it could be worse, because with the McLaren, if the crosswind comes from the left in 1 minute, the right in the next minute, it's actually worse. At least the crosswind was only in one direction. But it was slowing him down, which is not something sort of, you want to do when you're leading a Grand Prix and you want to stay ahead. It's not
is that
something
down to the car, or is it down to the driver when that happens?
It's kind of down to the car more so. The driver will battle as much as he possibly can. And it does, take a skillful man to do it. But as we've seen from
I suppose really with the car, they are light. Yeah. A Formula One car is kind of light enough, isn't it? Like, so it can be depending on the strength of the crosswind, obviously. But
obviously, now, I mean, a Formula One car isn't light, but it's designed to be as light as it possibly can. And with that engine in the back, sure, it's just absolutely incredible. But yeah, the problem with you have your downforce in your front, you have your downforce in your rear, and the air goes in the front when you're at speed. It doesn't matter what way the wind is blowing, usually, unless it's exceptionally strong. But in the corners, you've slowed down, and you're trying to go as fast as possible, because Formula One cars, if you're not driving fast, they get no downforce. You get no handling in the car whatsoever. It won't stick to the track. It has to drive fast. And now when you're getting the crosswind on a corner where you're not driving as fast as perhaps is optimal, that kind of causes the situation to be a bit more. Now, whatever McLaren are doing with the car, we can't say that was a bad thing, because, they're in race winning.
Like you were saying there, like about you have to drive fast to get the downforce, but that can, to an extent, that can come down to the track as well, because maybe to a certain extent some tracks don't allow you to drive fast in certain parts of the track, if you know what I mean. So with that in mind, it can be very hard to get the speed up in order to get the downforce.
Yeah, that is quite true. This particular track is fast and you get a lot of downforce, but not in the areas that McLaren. I think if it was somewhere like Qatar that we saw a couple of weeks ago, where it's very flat and dusty, I think if you got a crosswind around that now, it wouldn't affect you probably that much, because it is a fast circuit, providing the dust isn't slowing you down, of course. But Austin did have a couple of slow turns, which just didn't seem to agree. Now, he was having a problem there. The rest of the lap was very, very good. We can't knock it to him. And is it the reason he didn't win the race? It could well be. It could well be just that little issue. But he wasn't the only one having issues. They were trying to do strange things with Hamilton. He was instructed as plan +4, which we're assuming is the plan he's on +4 laps, trying to make it a one-stop strategy in order to keep ahead of several of the people behind them. After that lap, there was a call by Mercedes saying, try do 5 laps. But he said himself, the car was slowing. He couldn't do it. The tires were going off. Whatever strategy they had, he was starting to lose a lot of time. And he just pulled in after another couple of laps. It was a good call by Lewis. It was a bad call trying to get him to stay out longer. But I'm sure they were just seeing what could happen more so than anything else, taking a chance and seeing what can happen. But it was a good call of him to just say, I'm coming in. Because he can tell you what the handling is, I suppose, to a certain extent. Lap 29, Max Verstappen went on the medium tires, I have to admit. And that, again, he saved those mediums to the last, which was fantastic, because, of course, Lando Norris had switched to plan B, whatever that was. They didn't tell us what was going on there, and Lando was on the hard tires, so Max was pushing exceptionally hard on the medium tires. He was going to get by. Mind you, at the same time, Max Verstappen had a few uncharacteristic lockups. He was having slight brake issues with the car. Now, we're not quite sure what that was. From what I can see is you're allowed to change the brake pads, obviously, from sprint to race. And they put on new brake pads. So the new brake pad characteristic, with these things being as finely tuned as they are, possibly the new brakes were kind of a bit off. One wouldn't know, it was an unusual situation to see Max having any sort of problems. They were only minor lockups, they weren't major. But at the same time, you kind of, that's the way it goes, is to say, it's just, if he's going to have the better strategy, even with his brake lockup, the man still managed to do it. I did notice the Ferraris were not fighting anybody. They were basically just letting people by. The tires were just dead. If you're going to fight with people, your tires are going to go off even quicker. So you don't want that. Now, I thought it was very funny because Charles Leclerc on lap 45 got a call to change to plan D, and he just came back and said, "Too late," which I thought was very, very good. But his tires did come back. It's funny. There's a bad phase with the tires, and then suddenly his tires came back, and he tried his best, I have to admit, to do what he could with what he had. It wasn't really, perfect for him, but they did what they could do. And at the end of the race, we had Max Verstappen in first place, Lewis Hamilton in second, Norris in third, Sainz in fourth, Perez managed fifth, Leclerc managed sixth, Russell, Gasly, Stroll, Tsunoda, Albon, and Sargent, of course, roll the whole thing out. Max Verstappen can now join the elite, very small group of Sebastian Vettel, Alain Prost, Michael Schumacher, and Lewis Hamilton in winning 50 races. They are the only people who've ever done that. Now, he's also won 15 races in one season. And that was a record that he created last year. So is he going to break it this year? I would say he will. And then came the controversy in which you knocked on earlier, Aidan. It's good to have fun when it happens, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And of course, like I said, Lewis isn't one for controversy,
Not in
he doesn't
least.
give off or anything like that. He's misunderstood.
Now, I think there was two drivers had their times to lead it. It wasn't just Lewis, it was also Charles Leclerc. Now, a funny one was Fernando Alonso went out in the race with rear suspension failure, which is a pity because he's just such an amazing driver. And the rear suspension was having issues because of exactly the same issues that Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton were basically kicked out of the race because the FIA, the technical delegate, I think it's Joe Bauer, does standard post checks on the main cars up the front, usually a random check on the cars behind, but it's normally the main cars up the front. And there is physical checks and a check on the floor, the plank wear inspection, as they say. It's a skid block they put underneath the car. It does help it aerodynamically, but obviously, the cars do bottom out in rough corners sometimes, and the last thing you want to do is have something underneath happening to the car. So the skid block
really, would you kind of feel sorry for Lewis? I know we're not ones to feel sorry for any driver, but I mean, in that case, to have finished in second, which he doesn't really do that often, and to finally finish in second, and then to have to be stripped of second, for something to be fair to him, the reason he was disqualified for wasn't something that he mightn't have been aware of, or wasn't his fault. Maybe I don't know. What are your kind of thoughts on it from that side?
Yeah, it is a kind of an interesting issue, all right. I do get you on that one because, he was only 2.2 seconds behind Verstappen. Now, of course, that sounds amazing, but Verstappen was nursing a brake issue. So, I mean, Verstappen did an incredible job there. But, I mean, the thing with the physical core plank, it did wear below what is normal, and that's a safety thing. It's not anything else. Would you get a performance jump out of that? That's hard to say. That is
You
hard to
wouldn't think
say
so.
whether
Like
you
you
would or
wouldn't
not.
think
But
it would.
I would assume you don't. I would assume the
I could
driver's
be
done very
I
well.
could be wrong. Like I mean that's
I'd assume the driver's done very, very well, and I'd assume that the car's done very, very well. I can't see it causing any extra performance in the car. I could be wrong, but I can't see that. But I suppose that thing is there is a kind of a level for safety that they like to see. Now, the argument was with Lewis in particular that this is unfair because of the wear. The track in Austin, Texas isn't exactly the smoothest in the world. And you had not only qualifying and race, but you had sprint shootout and sprint race. So that's why it was worked down. But Bauer kind of said that they're not in compliance with the rules because it is up to the team to ensure that at the end of the race,
well, I mean,
at
the
the end
car
of the
should have been
weekend,
checked before the race to make sure there was like anything that went before the race. That before the race, they'd have a look at the car and anything that they felt could cost a penalty point or whatever for whatever reason, or that could potentially cause Lewis from being stripped of whatever position he was in. That
yeah,
they'd say, right, everything is checked. This car is good to go. There's nothing that can go against him, like as in, that he'd be stripped of second. In this instance. So maybe, and I know it's very kind of easy to blame the team, but I mean, look at. To be fair to Lewis, he's just there to drive, and he drives and he does his best. But if there's any fault in the car, there's or anything like that, that's not it's like it goes against him for something that's not his fault.
yeah.
And it's a bit of a raw deal.
I would never say 100% any driver is innocent in that sort of
Well, no,
situation.
I don't mean it that way, but I mean in this particular thing, he got her off.
I actually do think it's a bit unfair. I did think it was a bit unfair, I have to admit. There is degrees of wear on tracks. Now, it wouldn't have been, the FIA check these things to say, yes, it's good, no, it's not good, and that is it. And if you break it, that's it.
If the FIA are like that, should they not have checked it before and after? But I know that they'd have X amount of cars, and that could take a while too. But I mean, if they're down to that nitty gritty, then and they don't like. I mean, I presume that the engineers from Mercedes would check it, and
it is
all right. But if they don't, if the FIA aren't happy with that, then maybe why don't they check it themselves? If they're that pernickety,
Well, I suppose the technical regulations on these cars are, I'd say, a book bigger than the biggest dictionary you could nearly find. There's an awful lot on it, and they do leave an awful lot of onus on the team. I mean, they did announce that it is the team are the ones who must ensure all aspects of the car are legal, including wear. And that is probably in the contract, but I'm sure, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. Okay, Charles Leclerc was fifth, but he still liked the points. Thank you. I'm sure they did feel sort of hard done by. But then when you look at every other car on the track, George Russell's car wasn't disqualified. Carlos Sainz's car wasn't disqualified for that. They were fine. I mean, Russell finishing in fifth, his car would have been checked. Carlos Sainz finishing in third, his car would have been checked. So I don't understand why it's one team member and not the other in Ferrari and Mercedes. I have no idea why. It does seem a bit harsh, I suppose, but look, it's like everything, isn't it? Rules are rules, and some people benefited. I mean, it pushed Lando Norris up to second, Sainz up to third, Perez up to fourth, and then Russell was promoted to fifth, a happy camper, I'm sure.
So does that mean that Lewis Hamilton was put down if he was stripped of second? Does that mean that he goes back down the grid, or does it mean that he's put down as not finishing the race?
Well, basically, yes, disqualified. That's it, disqualified from the race. He may as well have not turned up
on
the day. So that's very unfortunate, but he may as well have just not turned up on the day. No points. Neil Qua. That's it. End of story. It is, yeah, it is harsh. I have to admit, I do think it is a harsh situation, and it's only going to get harsher because the FIA have also announced that they're going to be dishing out fines of up to 1 million for minor misdemeanors with the drivers from next year, as well as everything else with the cars and barge board issues and deleting times and stuff like that. They seem to be just, I don't know, is it a knee-jerk reaction to the sort of Hamilton Verstappen war that we had for Max Verstappen's first world championship or something?
Well, yeah, but if that's the case, though, why wait for 2 or 3 years to start bringing in something
well,
like that?
that is, yeah, it is very true. And I mean, £1 million, to you and me, to a Formula One driver, these lads are well paid. £1 million is a sting, but it's not that much of a sting, and I'm sure the team are going to help with that as well. They're not going to be completely, on that one. But when you look at it, it's a huge step. The biggest fine they've handed out in, I think, forever is about 100,000. And suddenly they're talking about handing out, £1 million. And now you have this, track limits. They're getting exceptionally hard on those. And I suppose perhaps it's only a kind of a thing that's happening this year. These track limits happening all the time, and now they're getting very intense on your car at the end of the race and issues with wear and stuff like that. Is it another way? You'd wonder, Aidan, is it actually another way of slowing the cars down?
Yeah,
it's kind of hard to say, isn't it? Making drivers think twice, making teams think twice, making teams perhaps, make the cars a little bit harder wearing. You would wonder what exactly is going on there. Is it unfair that the drivers get higher fines? I think £1 million is a bit too much. I think make it a mandatory 100,000 no matter what happens. Yeah. You can't get less. Maybe that would have been better. The barge board situation under the car, are we talking about a minimal issue here? Are we talking about a minimal issue? I mean, if it was only a slight amount, maybe add 5 seconds onto their finish time. I think disqualifying from the race is maybe a bit harsh, But we'll see. The FIA are not exactly immune to controversy.
They're very fond of doing all these things. Like, I mean, but I suppose with 4 minutes left, we'll go on to another one. So we're going to go on now to
Mexico,
the Mexico Grand Prix, and I'll just take you through the schedule. On October the 27th is practice 1. That's on from 7:30 to 8:30. Also on the 27th is practice 2, which is 23, which is 11 o'clock until 12. That's and then on the 28th then is practice 3 from 6:30 till 7:30, and then on the 28th then is the qualifying from 10 o'clock until 11, and then finally the race itself is on at 8 o'clock on the 29th of October. So that's the schedule. What are your thoughts? Lap time maybe, and all the usual things that we normally talk about.
Well, first of all, I'm very glad you said that, because I just after looking going, what is Aidan talking about? And then I realized under my time it says times displayed as track times. So I'm glad you said that one, Aidan. I'd have made a bog up on that one. It's a great little track. It really is. The first Grand Prix was in 1963, so it's been around a while. Now, if you're looking at it, is it me or is it in the shape of a gun?
I would say, you know what, looking at it, I would say it's like a boot upside down.
Well, do you know what? Yeah, I kind of get your point on that one there, actually. It could well be a boot upside down. The only thing is the bit at the back for pulling it onto the back of your ankle's a bit high, but we won't go there. We'll accept that one, as to say. Just so
there's not many kind of really straight. There's at the top section 1, and they're from third 3 to turn 4 is kind of a straight. But other than that, it's not what you call a direct, real straight track, where you can get speed up. A few corners where you wouldn't get the downforce as well, like to get the for it to stay on the track, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, I definitely think DRS is going to play in down to the first corner. It is such a long straight. It really is. If you've got a powerful car, Williams are going to love that straight. No one's going to get past the Williams, I can tell you, on that straight. It's absolutely incredible. And with the 90-degree turn, it's kind of, yeah, it would have been easy to defend on that if the straight wasn't as long as it is. I mean, you can imagine getting your DRS detection point. You're gone. By the time you get down to third one, you are ahead. Whereas it would have been more interesting if they were kind of, pushing it a bit more. But no, that's great. Then you've turned 3 to 4. You do have DRS there too. Not as long, but quite good. Now, the interesting sort of DRS third section is, of course, there's kind of a bit of a kink in it. It's not exactly very long. I don't know who's going to benefit from that one too much. Maybe perhaps if you have a lot of overspeed compared to the car in front of you, if it's a slower car, you might use it. But I can't see too many overtaking in that point. Perhaps I'm wrong. The DRS detection zone actually for Sector 1 is just after turn 15. I would have said that's very, very early to be doing detection for VRS, but look, there you go. It is. Now, I'm looking at the map here, and there's a DRS detection zone missing from 1 to 2, so I'm not quite sure. Perhaps it's me. I would have assumed there would have been another DRS protection zone, because let's face it, if you're going to get DRS for 2 fast sectors, that's a major benefit. Absolutely huge benefit. Hopefully not. The race distance is 305 kilometers, 71 laps, a circuit length of 4:03:04. Now, what happened last year is the one thing you're going to.
Yeah, so you were saying about who won about the Grand Prix.
Yes, well, last year, 2022, as we know, pole position went to Max Verstappen. Shocker. And the race itself, I thought that was a bit of a shock now myself, but we won't go there. And the race itself, we had Max Verstappen first, and we had Lewis Hamilton second. He was 15 seconds behind, which is considerable, but still got a second place. And Checo Perez was only 3 seconds behind him. After that, the fastest lap was George Russell, a 1:20.153 on the day. That was a good time from George. You have to hand it to him. He did a very good job last year. Now, are we going to see the same again sort of this year? It's kind of hard to say what's going to happen. Perhaps by the performance we've seen so far this year, it could well. The only upset they're going to have is Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. Hopefully the two of them can perform very well and kind of get up there in the mix with a bit of luck and fingers crossed and all that sort of crack. But we have to say Max Verstappen won his third drivers' championship there last year. So are we going to see what's going on here this time? That's a good question. We have to figure it out as we go along, as they say. The man who's actually won here the most as well happens to be Max Verstappen too. How many wins is he getting here? We're going to go back in time a little bit for the most wins for constructors. Red Bull 4, Lotus also 4. Long time since you've heard of a Lotus car, I would dare say.
Yeah, actually, it's been a while, all right.
Yeah, it's been quite some time. It'd be nice to see somebody resurrecting that team, I have to admit. Nice to see. It would be nice to see some of the older teams in, because as we know, Lotus are still going as a car manufacturer. So it'd be interesting if they wanted to come back and, go for gold, as they say. Another interesting one here, I have to admit, Ferrari have only really won, as a constructor here twice, 1970 and 1990. I would have thought it would have been a bit more prevalent than that, really, for Ferrari. It really is unlike them. And the first winner here was, it's actually 1962, Jim Clark, 1962 and 1963. What's interesting, actually, is on the list here in 1962, it has Trevor Taylor and Jim Clark. Did 2 people win? My app is very bad.
I joined first.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it'll be nice to be back back at the track and see what everybody can do in Mexico. I think we're expecting a Max Verstappen win, but it would be nice to see Lando Norris back up there in the mix again.
Yeah, I suppose.
I
And
think it
look,
could be anyway.
do you think that? Well, I suppose that sector one, the red sector, going I suppose the corners 1, 2, and 3, but and down to into the blue zone or whatever into sector 2. It's kind of it's straight enough. But do you think that that I suppose tire selection or I suppose tire selection will be important in this one? How many, and not only tire selection but also how many stops for tire changes and things like that?
Oh, definitely two stops. I think if you're trying a one, you're really going to hurt yourself. I mean, as you pointed out, sector two is very windy, twisty, going to be not great for the tires. Sector three as well is actually worse, but it's slower. So you're not going to get as much wear and tear on the tires there. But the curious thing is that I suppose a lot of people forget about it with the downforce on these cars going down that very long straight at the start. Your tires are going to get punished because the car is going to be getting forced down onto the track, as they say, because of the sheer speed it's doing and the downforce that I have on the car. They're going to get a bit punished down there coming up to lap one, turn one. So I'd say, short, medium, and a short, soft, maybe even. And if you can run a soft and two mediums, I think you're going to do very well on the day. If you're running the hard tires, I wouldn't advise it. Some will, but I wouldn't advise. Now, maybe someone's going to surprise us.
Well, I suppose when you're tearing the tires there, like you were saying there, it probably means that they are going to have to do more stops then for changing tires.
Really depends on what you're going to do here. Yeah, it does. If you can get your tires to drag out as far as they possibly can, that's going to be great. I do think if you're going to try a one stop, I think you're going to be in a world of pain. We saw it in the United States, which is a rough enough track, the United States, and this one isn't that much better. And we saw Lewis trying to do a one stop, and you're going to lose so much time. It's just ridiculous. You'd want to be way at the back of the grid altogether to try a one. I can't see anybody being, well, maybe someone will, but I would have said I can't see anybody being silly enough. Is that a way to put it?
only way that only you can do, you can put it, like, you know what I mean? I've pure faith in your how you say things. So you're right there.
As to say, yourself. Well, just as the people in Roscommon, I don't know if you're coming down for the Opera Festival in Wexford this year, but the fireworks are on Tuesday night. It's going to be pretty good.
And there's always fireworks in Ireland, somewhere.
There's always fireworks in Ireland, doesn't matter when it is. You know yourself. Legal fireworks, will we put it that way?
Oh, of course, yeah. Good job you added that in.
Yeah, good job. That's very true, actually. Have to cover ourselves. And I can neither confirm nor deny that Paul Egan is the lead tenor on all three operas this year.
Of course. And you're the composer.
Yeah, I did see Paul walking around with some garlic there the other day, so he could be saving the voice, yourself.
Well, this is it. But I suppose, comparing last year to this year, can you, do you think it'll go as planned, or could there be a few curveballs happening along the way in this one?
Oh, you never know. The fireworks could be worse this year. I know exactly what you're saying. The curveball to me is going to be Lando Norris. See, what they weren't there last year. They were doing reasonably well, but they weren't there last year. The other curveball that could delay people quite a lot is Williams, because there are two good straights on this. The first straight is exceptionally long. It's going to be very hard to pass the Williams on those straights. Really hard to pass the Williams on those straights. Judging by Ferrari's tyre issue, I think Ferrari could really call it a year. I can't see them doing anything, staggering, although with the performance of Aston Martin in the last while, Carlos Sainz could easily get past Fernando Alonso because they've just been doing so bad. And, in the driver standings that we always do, Max Verstappen is guess what first? And Sergio Perez second, with Lewis Hamilton 39 points behind him. So you can actually see what the team are talking about if he loses second place in that car, being nearly half the points of his teammate in the same car. You'd have to say it's really the onus on the driver. And in fairness to Checo, I'm not quite sure what it is this year. I think his head is just not in the game. I don't understand why. He was much faster last year. And, he even won a race or two last year. Whereas this year, he just seems to be sort of behind for some reason. He's going to want to do well this weekend. I mean, it is Mexico. Sergio Perez, we know where he's from. He's going to want to do well this weekend, if at all humanly possible. And to be honest, I think in fairness, if I was Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez was in a good second place, with a little bit in lead, a little bit, of a lead against the person in third place, I'd be inclined to just let him on by. I know that's not how you want to win a race, but still, it is his home Grand Prix. Give the guy a break.
Any sport, though, it's about like doing what it takes to win.
That's very true, but Max Verstappen's won. That's it. End story. He can't be beaten this year. He could go home and just not appear. It doesn't matter. He won it on sprint shootout back in Qatar. So I mean, that was that done.
He could stay at home and just watch it on but that wouldn't be in his nature. He'd want to be competitive and he'd want to.
Wouldn't be in anyone's nature, really. I mean, the more races you do, the more turns you drive in anger. It's always information, it's always data, it's always
it's also about keeping mentally sharp as well.
Absolutely. I mean, these guys, they're off now. Formula One's finished for the year. That's it. Not really. It's like time I was in Monza, we saw the residence of Felipe Massa and Michael Schumacher, and it's on the edge of the test track. That's where they lived with their families. So I mean, even a race weekend, Sunday you finish, probably Sunday and Monday you're traveling back, and you get a day off and you're back in the car. You're back, you're testing. Or if it's back to back, that's even worse because, the cars have to move from A to B, which could take a few days in doing that. But you're still back at the test track while that car is not available to you. So, I mean, maybe
it's kind of frustrating them because you want to be out the track, but you can't be because the car is still on the way. But
exactly, so they're back in the test cars and things like that, which they try to set up as much as the racing cars as much as they possibly can, but you can't exactly do that. I mean, you've got Max Verstappen; he's got a car set up for him. If the car's on a ship for 2 days or even 1 day, what does he do on that day? If it's his day off, that's great. If it's not his day off, he's got to jump in a test car, which won't exactly 100% be set up for him. So it's track time. You keep it sharp, but it's not going to be as sharp as your actual racing car. But look, it is what it is. Such is the trials and tribulations of Formula One drivers.
Just to go through a few things you probably mentioned there yourself. The first race, it's quite an old track. I mean, 1963 was the first Grand Prix. Number of laps, 71. Circuit length, 4.304 kilometers. The total race distance is 305.35 kilometers. And lap record was set by Valtteri Bottas in 2021 at 1.17. So, I mean, that's
3 seconds faster than the fastest lap last year.
Yeah, so, I mean, can you see that being beaten this year?
Not a chance in hell. 2022, 3 seconds slower. It's a lot, an awful lot. And the cars are advancing, but not advancing that quickly. If they get it down to 2 seconds, I'll be very impressed. Maybe half a second faster than last year, I would dare say. George Russell doing a sterling job to get that lap time, I can tell you. Max Verstappen's going to want it this year.
So I suppose really your top five then for this race.
The top five, well, we're going to put Max in first place. And I'm going to put Checo in a very difficult, as the best way to put it, second place, because I think he's going to have a hard time with Lando Norris. Hamilton finished second here last year. I can't see it this year. He's got just too much pressure from the McLaren, and Sergio Perez is going to want it. He's going to be hungry for it. He is going to be under pressure from, I think, in the background from the team. And I think he's going to feel that, and he's either going to respond and do the best drive he's had in a long time, or hopefully things won't go bad for him. But I don't know. He's a professional racing driver. He should be well able to. He should be well able to handle this. Well able to handle this. So I think the only acid rain on his parade is Fernando Alonso, or not Fernando Alonso, Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton, because the Ferraris, they might qualify well, but then they seem to drop back. So he needs to qualify a lot better than he did. 10th place for the last race. Yeah, that's not great. You'd want to be up in the top 3 for Sergio Perez. We shall see what happens. But just on fighting for place at the moment, Fernando Alonso's close to Lewis Hamilton, not close enough. He could have really made up a lot of points if the car had finished in the top 10 the last race, which it didn't.
Of course, with Lewis Hamilton being disqualified, that gives him a chance to kind of get closer to Lewis. But just looking at the stands here, at the standings here, and it's kind of relevant to maybe it'll tie in with some of what we were talking about. Is the standings are in first, with no one within any hope of catching them, is happened for Red Bull Racing. Honda is 466 points. Now, Sergio Perez in second. He's from Mexico. And also for Red Bull, he's way back in on 240 points.
Difference.
Then of course, 39 points behind him is Lewis Hamilton from Mercedes. Fernando Alonso in fourth from Aston Martin, and that's on 183 points. So there, like you said, there isn't that much of a distance points wise between Fernando and Lewis Hamilton. Then not too far behind Fernando Alonso points wise is Carlos Sainz from Ferrari on 171. Lando Norris from Great Britain, he's on McLaren Mercedes, 159 points. That's a bit of a distance, but not too bad.
Not too bad.
And then Charles Leclerc in seventh in Ferrari, and that's 151. George Russell in eighth for Mercedes, and that's 143. And then a bit of a jump, but not too bad, is in ninth, Oscar Piastri from Austria, and he's McLaren, and he's on 83 points. And finally in 10th, Pierre Gasly from France, and he's driving for Alpine Renault on 56 points. So I suppose just to tie those placings in with kind of what we were saying, we say after finishing the last race and going into the Mexican Grand Prix, what are your general thoughts?
Well, Fernando Alonso is not going to keep fourth place, not unless Aston Martin come up with some sort of upgrade that no one has seen so far. They say they're not doing anything else with the car, and the car is just, from the start of the year, oh wow, he was something else. Fernando, he's a world champion if you give him the car, but at the moment the car's fallen off some form of cliff. To go from third to 17th or 16th is absolutely dreadful in qualifying, So, I mean, Fernando could be falling backwards. Ferrari, I think, are no opposition for Hamilton at the moment whatsoever. I think Mercedes have done a good job, and Ferrari just can't get the tyres to work. The one guy that Hamilton has to keep an eye out for is George Russell. He's not that far behind. He's, 58 points behind. It sounds like a lot. There isn't many races left, but there's enough if what happened recently, happens again to Lewis and he gets kicked out of a race and Norris could easily win a race. That could come down quickly, and there is 3 races left: Brazil, United States, and Abu Dhabi. So, there is a little bit of danger there that if Lewis don't keep his nose clean, and start, not getting disqualified and stuff, Lando Norris could catch him. That said,
it wasn't his fault. It was something that wasn't his fault. For getting disqualified. Like, I mean, to be fair, last weekend was something he could have done without, and it must be extra frustrating for him when he knows, like, well, he wasn't at fault. It wasn't as though he went out and knowingly did it, or like he was the cause of it, or something like that. Like,
correct.
It was something that maybe the engineers or the FIA should have. But no, I'm not casting blame, but I'm just saying. It's very cruel on him. He has lost. He has been disqualified over something that isn't his fault, really.
No, I exactly agree with you. It does give Checo Perez a bit of a breathing place, because he went up 2 places, and give him a bit of breathing space, because Lewis is, he's only 39 points behind him. It's danger time for Perez. It's going to be hard for Hamilton to close it, because Perez would have to not finish a race, or finish quite down in the markings. But that said, last race he didn't finish that well, did he? I mean, if Hamilton hadn't been kicked out, he finished in 2nd place. Where did Checo actually finish again? 4th, 5th, 6th. He would have got 5th. So he would have lost out on a few extra points there. So I mean, things would have been an awful lot handier and an awful lot closer. I would not like to be in Sergio Perez's shoes at the minute, because I do honestly think Red Bull are. He has an extra year in his contract. It's till the end of next year, but contracts can be changed. There might be penalties, but contracts can be changed. And if Red Bull are feeling, well, lads, now you're not performing, and look at your teammate, which is exactly what I think any of us would be saying in this situation, he could find himself out of a Red Bull next year, and someone like Danny Ricciardo or someone like that in it instead. And where exactly Perez would go in that situation, it wouldn't be to one of the lead teams anyway. It could be.
He could go to the Egan team, the Egan O'Grady team,
Oh, the Egan F1 team. No. There's very high standards for that. Very high. Max Verstappen couldn't hit the time fast enough, even in the car. Like, it's just, no. Just can't do it, So we have to get specialist drivers for that team, yourself. It's one of those things, as I say. But he's going to have to finish in 2nd place, I think, in the next 3 races to impress them. He's definitely going to have to get a podium in all 3 races. But if Lewis Hamilton is finishing in front of him consistently in the next 3 races, Red Bull ain't going to be happy campers. There has, the thing I did like about this year is at least there's the controversies over where Hamilton's going to go and who he's talking to have disappeared, because that did not help last year and early this year. That did not help. That there could be a Ferrari contract and Ferrari are saying no. There could be a Red Bull contract and they're saying no. It hasn't been good. And even if Checo slides to one side, Lewis ain't getting that driving place. He might fancy it, but he ain't getting it. So
there's quite a queue ahead of him there, I suppose.
Well, exactly. So I don't know where Checo would drop back to, if you get me, because I mean, Red Bull are going to be looking for a number 2 driver. They're not going to be looking for a number 1 driver. They don't need a number 1 driver. They have Max Verstappen. They just want the number 2 driver who's going to finish behind him. You know what I mean? And that's where Perez should be, and he isn't. But look, there you go. No point. We're not controversial on this show. We don't like to talk about rumors and controversies.
No controversy on this show. No, it's about facts. All right, there. So thanks very much for taking the time out to the last word in Formula One, and we look forward to looking back on the Mexican Grand Prix next week and looking ahead to.
He caught me. Looking at, and I actually only mentioned it a few minutes ago, didn't I? We are looking ahead to Brazil. Oh, great track, actually. One of the best tracks of the year. I really like Brazil.
Fair play. So we look forward to doing that next week. So thanks very much. And that was Michael O'Grady and myself talking about all things Formula One.